Young women under the age of 30 shifted 11 points toward Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. That's according to NBC polling. The question many people are wondering is why? After all, it came as a shock to the Democrats, as many of them believe that freedom on reproductive issues would be a driving force steering all women, women of all ages, to Kamala Harris, who ultimately failed to achieve the presidency on that argument. Now, here to offer her perspective on why the GOP is faring so well with this demographic, young women, is Mailman, director of the Independent Women's Law Center. She also served as a legal advisor in the first Trump administration. Welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on with us. So this is something that has been noted, all of these demographic shifts that favored Donald Trump in his successful reelection this time around, but young women in particular, young people overall, but even young women. We've heard a lot about young men becoming more conservative or being reached culturally or through the media means that Donald Trump has at his disposal, well, the podcasts he went on. But it's also true that his message is resonating with young women more than perhaps in the past. Can you give us some thoughts on why you think that might be the case?
Yeah, because I see this election and the political parties less about the traditional demographics that we like to break down by race, by sex, and more along the lines of class. And so you see this, what might be shocking to people is that white men fell away from Donald Trump from 2016 to 2020 to 2024. And why is that? Well, I would be willing to bet that it's not that it has anything to do with whiteness or have anything to do with maleness. And it has a lot to do with people with 2 or 3 degrees shifting toward the Democratic Party and people without those degrees shifting toward the Republican Party. And so I think I would view this less as womanhood and more as what is the class divide and how is Donald Trump reaching that class divide and going where Republicans haven't gone and talking to women who are really concerned about their finances. And then I think also there's an element of cultural normalcy here. Women who have always considered themselves to be normal, reasonable people, they want to live next to normal, reasonable neighbors. And there was just something very ultra progressive about Kamala Harris, who still has her pronouns in her bio, that again doesn't bridge the class divide, but also doesn't strike one as normal.
Speaking of pronouns, I did notice over the weekend, and I was not the only person to notice this, that AOC, for instance, actually removed her pronouns from her bio, changed her description there. I think now it says Congresswoman or something even. Is this a sign that Democrats are absorbing the message that some of the, whatever you want to call it, woke, cultural, progressive signaling that they've done, even more so than policy, but signaling, or their association with that cultural milieu has not been helpful to their electoral chances?
Even if we can think of this as a blip, as like a 5-second, they realize that going full gender ideology strikes people as insane. Like, even if we can acknowledge that there are people thinking that right now, I don't think that it's going to last. I don't see this as a major shift in the Democrat Party. And you can already see this with Jen Psaki saying, I acknowledge that the they-them commercial was an effective one, but why? I mean, why? This is an issue that's so little, there are very few people who identify as transgender in the United States. And so already they are trying to minimize this as an issue. And I don't think Democrats quite understand the point. The point is not necessarily that every voter got out there and thought that they're a female prisoner and a male is going to come into their prison cell, or that they are going to be not able to be an NCAA champion because of a male. What people voted against was, if you can't acknowledge the biological difference between man and woman, then you are not like me. You're not like my neighbors. You are too progressive. You're too elite, and I don't trust you. And by already trying to minimize this issue, it shows that Democrats are not actually picking up on what that message was. It's not about individual instances. It is about Democrats not acknowledging reality and not seeming like the more trustworthy normal party.
That all may be the case, May, and I certainly think demographic shifts of whatever kind are always fascinating. I'm as interested in the exit polls as anyone. But I just want us to be careful here that we don't get too far over our skis in talking about the shift in gender voting. It is certainly true that Vice President Harris won women by a narrower margin than President Biden did in 2020. But she still had an 8-point margin with all women, a bigger advantage with unmarried women, for example, 21 points according to the exit polls, a 24-point advantage with women under 30. So how does that fit into your overall thesis? Why do you think younger women in particular are still more resilient in terms of supporting the Democratic Party overall?
Because I think that there's an identity element. I ask young men wherever I go, and they tend to be conservative, but why are all of your colleagues voting Democrat? Is it abortion? What is it, issue-based? What is it? It is sort of abortion that weighs, but it is that everyone else is doing it. That just is what you do. You like Taylor Swift and you vote Democrat. And so I think the reason that it's notable that Kamala Harris didn't completely trounce with that group, that she didn't get the numbers, the delta that she was planning on getting, is that if it's not actually an identity, if a lot of people don't actually identify as that, they just socially do, they just act like they do, then you don't have that group like you thought you did. So these are not reliable voters like you thought that they were. So yes, these are people who do tend to vote Democrat, and they still do, young women. But the fact that it's not reliable, I think, means that these are people who are swing voters, ultimately, at the end of the day. Like if they're in the 50-ish percentile, they're swing voters, and that's a really positive sign for the Republicans and not so much for the Democrats.
Donald Trump, I think it is fair to say, worked very hard during the campaign to minimize what had become this very salient and bad issue for Republicans, abortion, by saying over and over again there will not be a national abortion policy. He frankly made Republicans in his orbit who have been more vocally pro-life or about having a national pro-life position to walk that back and have it, no, it's because states are going to do it, and if states are not ready for a more conservative approach, then that's fine. He exercised kind of dictatorial control over what the platform would be with respect to that issue. I think the question becomes, can he keep things in that way without alienating social conservatives, having that, still proceeding along that path?
That'll be difficult because it is very easy to say that everything should be left to the states, but there obviously are things that presidents can and traditionally have done in order to protect life. And we're in a new frontier, because I was in the last Trump White House, and you really couldn't do a lot of things in order to protect life because you did have the Roe versus Wade and Casey decision putting guardrails on that. Here, maybe there is more opportunity, but I think that you have to take President Trump at his word and say that this has to be an issue at the states. And I think that is the pro-democracy position. And there ultimately might be a Democratic response that says, as a nation, we are ready for some sort of federal position on this. But right now, I think that federal position is reflected in the Hyde Amendment, which is decades long, which is the federal government is going to allow this compromise to play out by at least not funding abortion. This is a decision for the states, so that's one side of the compromise. And on the other side, the federal government is not going to pay for these abortions. And so that was something that I think it's a compromise. Nobody really loves it, but continuing on that path is what I basically would expect.
Mailman, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.